I'm Jessica Mitchell, 28 years old, and the night my family laughed when my dad said I take up space changed everything. We were gathered around our mahogany dining table, the one my great-grandfather built when I tried to share my news. Dad cut me off with those four crushing words, and everyone erupted in laughter. It wasn't the first time they dismissed me, but something in me snapped. That night, as tears streamed down my face, I realized I'd spent my entire life shrinking to fit into my family's world. It was time to create my own. Before I dive into this story, where are you watching from today? Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Trust me, by the end of this story, you'll see how taking up your rightful space can change everything. Let's get started. Growing up in Boston's affluent Beacon Hill neighborhood, our brownstone was the picture of New England perfection. My father Richard built a thriving investment firm from scratch and never let anyone forget it. He dominated every room with his imposing presence and booming voice, a voice that softened for everyone except me. To the outside world, he was charming and generous. Behind closed doors, he demanded perfection and unwavering respect. My mother Diane was beautiful, graceful, and perpetually conflict avoidant. While she occasionally whispered comfort to me after particularly harsh criticisms from Dad, she never once defended me publicly. "That's just how your father is," she'd say, straightening my collar or tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "He wants what's best for you." Her primary concern was maintaining peace, even if that peace came at my expense. Then there was my older brother Ryan, 3 years my senior and the undisputed golden child. He mirrored my father in nearly every way, from his interest in finance to his dismissive attitude toward anything artistic. Ryan could do no wrong. His B-plus grades were celebrated while my A's were expected. His mediocre athletic achievements warranted professional photography sessions, while my academic awards collected dust in drawers. My younger sister Stephanie completed our family portrait. Just 13 months younger than me, Stephanie and I should have been allies. Instead, she learned early that aligning with Ryan and Dad meant protection and privilege. She became fiercely competitive, viewing any attention I received as attention stolen from her. If I wore a new dress, Stephanie needed a better one. If I mentioned a school accomplishment, Stephanie quickly redirected the conversation to her own achievements. The pattern began early. When I was 9, I spent weeks on a science fair project about renewable energy building, a working miniature windmill that generated enough electricity to power a small light bulb. The night before the fair, I found my carefully crafted display board water damaged beyond repair. Stephanie claimed she accidentally spilled her juice, but the perfectly targeted nature of the damage seemed suspicious. My mother simply handed me construction paper to start over, while Dad muttered about learning to be more careful with your things. I stayed up all night remaking the display. It wasn't nearly as good as the original, but I still won 3rd place. When I brought home the ribbon, my father glanced at it and said, "3rd place is just the first loser." Ryan won 1st place in his science fair. The fact that Ryan was 3 grades ahead and had significant help from Dad went unmentioned. My talents always leaned toward the creative. I discovered woodworking in middle school when Mr. Jacobson, the shop teacher, noticed me lingering after class to examine the tools. "You've got good hands for this," he said after watching me complete my first small project. Under his guidance, I created increasingly complex pieces, first jewelry boxes, then chairs, eventually tables. At home, these creations were dismissed as cute hobbies or crafts, never acknowledged as the art and engineering they combined. When I converted our garage into a weekend workspace, my father complained about the noise and sawdust. When I sold my first commission piece to a neighbor for $200, my mother worried it would distract from college preparation. College should have been my escape, but Boston University kept me within my family's orbit. I majored in industrial design with a focus on furniture, thriving in the creative environment and graduating with honors. At my graduation dinner, my father toasted Ryan's acceptance to business school for a full 15 minutes before briefly acknowledging my degree with, "And Jessica finally finished her art classes too." After college, I secured a position at a respected design firm in downtown Boston. Though entry-level, it was competitive and well-regarded in the industry. At family gatherings, my career progress was treated as a curious diversion, something I was doing until I got serious or found a husband. Meanwhile, Ryan's every promotion warranted family celebrations, and Stephanie's job at a public relations firm was deemed sophisticated and promising. Sunday dinners became weekly exercises in diminishment. I'd arrive with news about a challenging project or promising client meeting only to have the conversation immediately redirected to Ryan's latest deal or Stephanie's newest connection with a minor celebrity. If I persisted in trying to share my world, eyes would glaze over, or worse, someone would check their phone mid-sentence. I developed coping mechanisms, speaking faster to get my thoughts out before being interrupted, apologizing before expressing opinions, physically taking up less space by perching on chair edges, rather than sitting fully. I became an expert at reading the room, gauging my father's mood and adjusting my presence accordingly. I pursued excellence relentlessly, hoping that extraordinary achievements might finally earn me the recognition freely given to my siblings. But no accomplishment was ever quite enough, and no amount of shrinking myself ever made me acceptable. I existed in a perpetual state of not quite rightness in my family's eyes, a puzzle piece from another set altogether. My mother's 55th birthday dinner was meant to be a celebration, not an ending. I spent weeks designing and crafting a jewelry box specifically for her walnut with maple inlay, her initials subtly incorporated into the design, the interior lined with the same blue silk as her wedding dress. I'd even added a secret compartment that could only be opened if you knew to press 2 spots simultaneously, perfect for her most treasured pieces. I arrived early to help set up, placing my carefully wrapped gift among the others on the sideboard. Our family home looked as it always did, immaculate, expensive, cold. The large dining room, dominated by that massive mahogany table that had witnessed so many uncomfortable meals over the years. "There you are," my mother said when she spotted me arranging flowers. She air-kissed near my cheek, careful not to smudge her makeup. "You look thin. Are you eating enough?" Before I could answer, she was already adjusting the table settings I'd just completed. "The dessert forks go on the inside, Jessica. You know that." By 7, everyone had arrived. My father looking distinguished in his tailored suit, Ryan, with his new girlfriend, Catherine, a carbon copy of every girlfriend before her blonde, preppy, deferential, and Stephanie 15 minutes late and make an entrance in a dress nearly identical to mine, but in a more flattering color. "Great minds," she smirked, twirling to show how the fabric moved. "Though I think emerald suits my complexion better than that mustard does yours." Dinner proceeded with practiced precision. The hired help served my mother's favorites, oysters, Rockefeller, filet mignon, duchesse potatoes. My father dominated the conversation with stories of his recent business trip to Singapore, pausing occasionally to let Ryan add complimentary anecdotes from his own deals. When the plates were cleared and before dessert, my mother opened her gifts. Ryan and Catherine gave her a diamond tennis bracelet that elicited appropriate gasps. Stephanie presented a weekend spa package at my mother's favorite retreat. Then came my gift. "How creative," my mother said flatly after unwrapping the jewelry box. She ran her fingers over the wood without noticing the inlay pattern matched her favorite earrings. "It must have taken you quite some time." "I designed it specifically for you," I said, leaning forward eagerly. "The inlay pattern is—" "Diane, have you told the kids about the renovation plans?" My father interrupted, effectively closing discussion of my gift, which was set aside without discovery of its secret compartment. "Oh yes, we're finally updating the kitchen," my mother brightened, clearly relieved to move on. As coffee was served, Ryan announced his promotion to junior partner 3 years ahead of schedule. My father beamed with unmistakable pride, launching into predictions about Ryan's inevitable rise to senior partnership. I saw my opening when Ryan finished describing his new office. I actually have some exciting news too, I ventured, sitting up straighter. A major home design magazine is featuring one of my chair designs in their September issue, and I've been approached about potentially launching my own small collection. The momentary silence around the table felt like the pause before a storm. Your own collection, my father's eyebrows rose. Of furniture. His tone made it sound like I'd announced plans to collect garbage. Yes, I continued, forcing enthusiasm. It's a significant opportunity to... Jessica, my father sighed heavily, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. We've indulged this furniture hobby of yours for years now. Don't you think it's time to focus on something substantial? You know, something where you don't just take up space. The laughter started with Ryan's snort, then Stephanie's giggle, until even my mother was covering her smile with her napkin. They were laughing, all of them, like it was the most natural response in the world. In that moment, I felt a strange detachment, like I was floating above the table watching this scene play out. I saw myself, shoulders, hunched face, flushed eyes, downcast, and surrounding me. These people who should love me unconditionally, but instead found amusement in my diminishment. Memories flashed through my mind. My 8th birthday when no one showed up because Dad scheduled it during Ryan's soccer tournament. My high school art exhibition where I stood alone beside my displayed work while my family attended Stephanie's debate competition. Countless dinners where I might as well have been invisible. I maintained my composure, somehow smiling tightly and allowing the conversation to move on. I even helped clear dessert plates, complimented my mother on her age-defying appearance, and hugged everyone goodbye with mechanical precision. But in my car, alone in the darkness, something broke. Tears came in, violent, gasping sobs that bent me double over the steering wheel. I screamed until my throat burned raw, pounding the dashboard until my palms stung. When the storm finally passed, an eerie calm settled over me. I wiped my eyes, straightened my posture, and drove home with a clarity I'd never before experienced. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I researched furniture design programs, artisan communities, and cost of living comparisons across the country. By dawn, I knew exactly what I needed to do. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. On the surface, I maintained the same routines, going to work, attending a Sunday dinner, though I claimed a headache and left early, even meeting Stephanie for our monthly obligatory sister lunch. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, I was systematically dismantling and rebuilding my entire existence. First came the financial preparations. I'd always been careful with money, saving what I could from my modest designer salary. But it wasn't enough for what I needed. I researched small business loans, compiled a portfolio of my best work, and drafted a comprehensive business plan focusing on custom handcrafted furniture with a unique aesthetic. Eastern Bank rejected me outright. So did Wells Fargo. But a smaller credit union approved my application after an intensive interview where my passion apparently outweighed my limited collateral. I secured a $40,000 loan, enough to transport me across the country and establish a modest workshop. Simultaneously, I reached out to contacts in the furniture world. My mentor from college, Professor Martin, connected me with the Pacific Northwest Artisan Collective in Seattle, a community of woodworkers, metalworkers, and textile artists who shared workspace and resources. After reviewing my portfolio, they offered me provisional membership and access to their communal equipment. The real breakthrough came when I was accepted into the Rainier Artisan Development Program, a prestigious year-long fellowship that provided mentorship, exhibition opportunities, and a small stipend. It was exactly what I needed to establish myself in a new city. Housing was trickier. Seattle's rental market was notoriously competitive and expensive. I spent nights scrolling through listings, becoming increasingly discouraged until Brenda, A former colleague who'd relocated to Seattle 2 years earlier mentioned her neighbor was looking for someone to sublet while they worked in Europe for a year. The apartment was small, barely 500 square feet, but came partially furnished and miraculously within my budget. Each night after work, I inventoried my possessions, ruthlessly separating the essential from the expendable. I sold furniture, electronics, books, anything that wouldn't fit in my Honda Civic or couldn't be shipped economically. I calculated gas costs for a cross-country drive, researched the safest routes for a woman traveling alone, and plotted potential stopping points. Throughout this frenzy of planning, a persistent voice in my head questioned everything. Was I being dramatic? Could I simply move to a different part of Boston? Should I try once more to make my family understand? Was I throwing away security for a childish fantasy? But then I'd remember my father's dismissive words, the cruel laughter, and my resolve would harden again. This wasn't a tantrum, it was survival. 2 days before my planned departure disaster struck, I returned from work to find my laptop open, not how I'd left it. My browser history showed someone had accessed my email bank accounts and the document where I'd stored all my Seattle plans. Going somewhere, Stephanie's voice startled me. She was sitting in the dark corner of my living room, scrolling through her phone as if she belonged there. "How did you get in?" I demanded, though I already knew. She'd kept the spare key I'd given her for emergencies. "That's your question, not why your perfect big sister is running away from home like a teenager." She stood moving into the light. "Does anyone else know about this little escape plan?" "It's not an escape plan," I said, though of course it was exactly that. "It's a career opportunity." Stephanie laughed, the sound eerily similar to our father's. "In Seattle, 3,000 miles away, please. You're having a meltdown because Dad called you out." "He didn't call me out. He humiliated me. You all did." My voice shook, but not with fear, with anger. And it wasn't the first time. "Oh my God, here comes the victim routine." She rolled her eyes. "You know what I'm telling them. Tonight, Dad will probably freeze your accounts." Something shifted inside me then. All my life I'd back down when confronted by my family, retreated into myself rather than stand my ground. But not this time. "Go ahead," I said, my voice steady. "Tell them. But first, ask yourself why it bothers you so much that I'm leaving. Is it because you'll miss me, or because you're losing your favorite person to feel superior?" Her expression faltered. For once, Stephanie seemed genuinely caught off guard. And for the record, I continued. "Dad can't freeze my accounts. I've moved my money. The loan is in my name only. I've thought of everything, Stephanie, because I've had years of practice preparing for worst-case scenarios in this family." We stood in silence, the power dynamic between us shifting palpably. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Your silence. For 48 hours. That's all." She considered this, calculating as always. "And what do I get?" "Of course. Stephanie never did anything without personal gain. My car, I offered. I was going to sell it, but you can have it. It's paid off, low mileage. I'll sign it over to you tomorrow." My Honda was worth far more than 2 days of silence, but I knew Stephanie couldn't resist getting something for nothing, especially something that would normally go to me. "Deal," she said after a moment. "But I want the papers signed now." I didn't sleep that night, too afraid Stephanie would break our deal. By morning, I'd accelerated my timeline. What was meant to take 2 more days would now happen in hours. Sometimes betrayal is the push you need to jump without looking back. The opportunity came sooner than expected. My parents called to announce they were attending Ryan's corporate awards ceremony that evening. "Not that you'd be interested," my mother added. "It's a business crowd." The invitation that wasn't really an invitation was typical, maintaining the appearance of inclusion while ensuring I knew I didn't belong. As soon as they left, I sprang into action. The packing I'd planned to complete over 2 days needed to happen in 3 hours. I moved through my apartment like a whirlwind, throwing essential clothing into suitcases, carefully wrapping the few sentimental items I couldn't leave behind, and boxing up my specialized woodworking tools. In the process, I unearthed forgotten pieces of my history, a spelling bee trophy, my parents' never attended photographs where I stood slightly apart from the family grouping birthday cards with generic messages. Each item triggered memories, each memory reinforced my decision. I found myself lingering in my small home workshop, running my fingers over the workbench I'd built when I first moved in. This space, cramped as it was, had been my sanctuary. Here, I could create without criticism, build without boundaries. I couldn't take the physical space with me, but I was carrying its spirit westward. With my car nearly packed, only one task remained. I sat at my desk and began to write, "Dear family, by the time you read this, I'll be halfway across Pennsylvania. I'm moving to Seattle to pursue my furniture design career. This isn't a hasty decision or emotional reaction, though the events at Mom's birthday dinner certainly confirmed it was the right one. For 28 years, I've tried to earn a place at our family table. I've dimmed my light, muted my voice, and contorted myself to fit the space you deemed appropriate for me. I've watched Ryan receive encouragement for mediocrity, while my achievements were dismissed as hobbies. I've endured Stephanie's constant competition and Mom's passive enabling of Dad's favoritism. I'm not writing to hurt you or to extract apologies. I'm writing because despite everything, I do love you, and I want you to understand that this departure isn't about rejection, it's about self-preservation. I need to discover who I am without the constant shadow of family expectations. I don't know if we'll find our way back to each other. That depends on many things, including whether you can see me. Really see me for who I am, rather than who you wanted me to be. I wish you well. Jessica." I sealed the envelope and placed it on the kitchen counter where it couldn't be missed. Then, with methodical determination, I did a final sweep of the apartment, locked the door, and began loading the last few boxes into my car. The sound of another car pulling into the driveway froze me mid-motion. It was too early for my parents to be back from Ryan's event. I peered around the corner to see my mother emerging from her Mercedes alone. "Jessica," she called, spotting my packed car immediately. "What's going on?" For a moment, I considered making a run for it, jumping in my car and speeding away before the inevitable confrontation. But I'd spent my whole life running from conflict, and where had it gotten me? "I'm leaving," I said, simply closing my trunk with decisive finality. "Leaving for where? For how long?" My mother's voice rose with each question. As she approached me, her eyes widening at the clearly permanent nature of my packed belongings. "Seattle. Indefinitely. There's a letter inside explaining everything." "A letter?" She looked bewildered, as if the concept was entirely foreign. "Jessica, you can't just leave with a letter. That's not how families handle things." "How do we handle things, Mom?" "By pretending problems don't exist. By laughing when Dad puts me down. By treating me like I'm invisible. Except when you need someone to criticize." Her face paled. "That's not fair. Your father and I have given you everything. Everything except respect. Acceptance. Equal treatment." The words I'd suppressed for years tumbled out. "Do you have any idea what it's like to sit at that dining table and be treated like an afterthought in your own family? To watch Ryan receive praise for breathing, while my legitimate accomplishments are dismissed as cute little hobbies?" "You're being dramatic," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Your father is hard on you because he wants you to succeed. No, he's hard on me because I'm not Ryan. Because I chose a path he doesn't understand or value. Because I remind him of the creative side of himself he suppressed to become successful in his eyes." "That's not true," she whispered, tears forming. "We love you, Jessica." "Maybe you do," I conceded, feeling my own eyes well up. but you've never loved me for who I actually am. And I can't spend another day trying to become someone I'm not just to earn a seat at this family's table." She reached for me, her manicured hand trembling. "Please don't go. We can talk about this. We can work on things." For a brief, wavering moment, I felt the familiar pull, the desperate hope that this time would be different, that this conversation might finally lead to change. But 28 years of evidence suggested otherwise. "I'm not saying it's forever," I said, gentler now. "But I need this. I need space to discover who I am without all of you defining me." "Your father will be furious," she said, revealing where her true concerns lay. "I know. Tell him I said goodbye." I got into my car, hands shaking as I inserted the key. Through the window, I watched my mother standing in the driveway, perfectly coiffed and utterly lost, a woman who had spent her life smoothing rough edges and avoiding confrontations, now faced with a situation she couldn't manage with platitudes. As I pulled away, the rearview mirror showed her becoming smaller, more distant, until she disappeared completely around the bend. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was driving away from the only life I'd known toward a future I could barely imagine, filled with equal parts terror and exhilaration. The first 100 miles felt like a dream, or perhaps a dream of escaping a nightmare. I drove mechanically, hands at 10, and two eyes fixed on the highway stretching before me, half expecting to see my father's Mercedes in the rearview mirror coming to drag me back to Boston. Night fell as I crossed into Pennsylvania. The reality of what I'd done began to sink in, bringing with it waves of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm me. I pulled into a roadside motel just outside of Scranton, a faded 2-story establishment that had seen better decades. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and cigarettes, poorly disguised, but it was clean and anonymous. I sat on the edge of the sagging bed, the events of the day crashing over me like a physical force. My hands trembled as I checked my phone. 12 missed calls, 5 from my mother, 4 from my father, 2 from Ryan, 1 from Stephanie. Voicemails ranged from my mother's tearful pleas to my father's cold fury. Ryan's message dripped with condescension. "Whatever tantrum you're throwing, it's time to grow up and come home." Stephanie's text was simplest. "You actually did it. Didn't think you had it in you." The panic attack hit without warning. One moment I was scrolling through messages, the next I was gasping for air, my chest constricting, vision tunneling to pinpricks of light. I slid to the floor, drawing my knees to my chest, certain I was dying. For what seemed like hours but was likely minutes, I battled the overwhelming urge to call my mother to tell her I'd made a terrible mistake, to beg forgiveness, and return to the familiar misery of home. My finger hovered over her number, trembling. Instead, I called Professor Martin, my college mentor. It was nearly midnight, but he answered on the third ring. "Jessica, is everything all right?" His voice, kind, concerned, familiar, anchored me. I explained between ragged breaths what I'd done, where I was, how I was questioning everything. "Listen to me," he said after I'd finished. "What you're feeling is normal. You've made a courageous choice, and courage doesn't mean absence of fear, it means acting despite it. Your family has conditioned you to doubt yourself, to seek their approval. This panic is your conditioning, not your intuition." His words penetrated the fog of anxiety. I closed my eyes, focusing on steadying my breathing. "You have extraordinary talent, Jessica. I wouldn't have connected you with the Seattle Collective if I didn't believe that. Trust yourself. Trust this journey." By the time we hung up, my breathing had normalized, and though fear still lingered, it no longer controlled me. I slept fitfully, but woke determined to continue westward. The second day brought me through the rolling hills of Ohio and into Indiana. As miles accumulated behind me, I felt a gradual lightening, as if each state line crossed loosened my family's gravitational pull. That evening, while pumping gas outside Indianapolis, my phone rang with Ryan's number. "Where the hell are you?" he demanded when I answered. "Indiana." "This is ridiculous, Jessica." Do you have any idea what you've done to Dad's furious? You need to turn around now and come home before you completely burn this bridge. I didn't call to fight Ryan. Then why did you call at all to gloat about your grand rebellion to play the victim again? You called me, remember? I said quietly. The momentary silence told me he'd forgotten that fact entirely. Typical Ryan, so consumed with being right that reality became malleable. Whatever, just come home, Jess. This furniture thing was cute when it was a hobby, but you're throwing away your life for some pipe dream. In that moment, I realized something profound. Ryan's opinion no longer mattered to me. The revelation was liberating. Goodbye, Ryan, I said, and ended the call. Each night I developed a ritual. I'd check into a motel shower away the day's travel, then read my family's increasingly manipulative texts before deleting them one by one. My father's messages evolved from anger to threats of financial consequences. My mother's pleas became more desperate, eventually revealing that my father had suffered stress-related chest pains after my departure, a transparent attempt at medical guilt I might once have fallen for. In Iowa, I discovered that my father had indeed flexed his financial muscle, closing a joint investment account we'd established years earlier. The $12,000 it contained had been earmarked for my eventual return to a serious career path. Its loss should have devastated me. Instead, I felt oddly relieved. One less tether to cut. The landscape changed as I drove flat farmlands giving way to the rolling prairie, then the dramatic rise of the Rockies. I stopped at the Continental Divide, standing at the geographical point where waters flow either east to the Atlantic or west to the Pacific. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was at a watershed moment in my own life, everything flowing in a new direction. Outside Cheyenne, Wyoming, I picked up a hitchhiker, something I'd never have done in my previous life. Mia was a 23-year-old ceramicist traveling to Portland for an apprenticeship. With her purple-streaked hair and arms covered in artistic tattoos, she was exactly the sort of person my parents would have warned me against. "So you're running away too, huh?" she asked, after I'd shared a condensed version of my story. "Not running away. Running toward," I corrected, surprising myself with a conviction in my voice. Mia grinned. "Good answer. I left home at 18. My dad was an alcoholic with 2 settings: passed out or pissed off. Mom was so checked out, she might as well have been a ghost. Took me 3 years to stop flinching whenever someone raised their voice. We shared the driving over the next 2 days, Mia's stories of survival and reinvention, giving me perspective on my own journey. Her family trauma made mine seem almost privileged in comparison, yet she recognized the psychological damage of constant dismissal. "Emotional neglect leaves invisible bruises," she said as we crossed into Washington state. "Just because no one can see them doesn't mean they're not real." Seattle welcomed us with its trademark rain, a gentle but persistent drizzle that seemed to wash away the last of my East Coast dust. Mia helped me unload my car at my new apartment before catching a bus to continue her journey to Portland. We exchanged numbers with genuine promises to stay in touch. Standing alone in my tiny new apartment, a studio with windows overlooking a brick wall, I experienced a moment of perfect clarity. This spare, unfamiliar space represented something I'd never had before, a room that was entirely mine, shaped by my choices alone, free from family expectation or judgment. The wall I faced wasn't a limitation but a blank canvas. I unpacked my tools first. My first week in Seattle passed in a blur of adjustment. The constant rainfall, so different from Boston's distinctive seasons, required an inner recalibration as significant as the 3-hour time difference. My apartment, which had seemed charmingly cozy in photos, revealed itself to be aggressively small in person. The shared bathroom down the hall, with its temperamental plumbing, added a layer of complexity to daily routines. Yet these challenges, while frustrating, felt like problems I could solve, unlike the deeply entrenched family dynamics I'd left behind. When the shower refused to produce hot water, I could speak to the superintendent. When my apartment felt cramped, I could rearrange furniture. These were obstacles with solutions, not the intractable emotional labyrinth of the Mitchell family. The Pacific Northwest Artisan Collective occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial district. On my first visit, I stood outside for nearly 20 minutes, gathering courage before entering. Inside the space hummed with activity. Woodworkers, planing boards, metal workers, welding delicate joints, textile artists stretching fabrics on frames. The collective energy was intimidating and exhilarating. Marcos, the collective's coordinator, gave me a tour and introduced me to several members. Everyone was polite but reserved. I was, after all, an outsider from the opposite coast whose membership was still provisional. "Don't worry about the cool reception," Marcos said as we finished the tour. "Seattle has what we call the freeze. People are friendly but not immediately welcoming. Give it time." The Rainier Artisan Development Program began the following week. 12 of us gathered in a sunlit studio space at the Seattle Center for our orientation, a diverse group ranging from recent art school graduates to mid-career professionals seeking new directions. Our lead mentor was Carlos Vasquez, a furniture designer whose work I'd admired for years in design magazines. Carlos was nothing like I expected: short, round, and perpetually smiling, with none of the pretension common in established artists. But when he spoke about design principles, his authority was absolute. "Your first assignment," he announced after our introductions, "is to create a piece that represents rebirth or transformation. You have 3 weeks." The symbolism wasn't subtle. I returned to my apartment that evening and sketched for hours trying to conceptualize my rebirth piece. Given my history and limited workshop access, the obvious choice was a table, the very object around which my family dynamics had played out for years. But every design I created felt derivative or trite. A table with broken legs mended with gold, mimicking Japanese kintsugi. Too literal. A table that appeared conventional but concealed surprising elements. Too gimmicky. A table with intentionally mismatched parts. Too chaotic. For days I struggled, my sketches becoming increasingly desperate. The harder I tried, the more I heard my father's dismissive voice in my head. "Just taking up space." The pressure to prove him wrong, to prove myself worthy of this opportunity, paralyzed my creativity. Our first critique session was a disaster. While other fellows presented thoughtful concepts and early prototypes, I stumbled through an explanation of my unfocused ideas, my voice thin with anxiety. Carlos's expression remained neutral, but I recognized the disappointment in his eyes. "Jessica, stay a moment," he said after dismissing the group. "Here it comes," I thought. "He's going to tell me I don't belong here." Instead, Carlos pulled up a chair and asked, "What are you fighting against?" "I don't understand," I replied. "Your sketches, your presentation, they're all defensive. You're creating against something, not for something." He studied me. "What are you trying to disprove?" The question cracked something open in me. Before I could stop myself, the whole story poured out: the family dynamics, the dismissal of my work, the fateful dinner, my escape across the country. Carlos listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. When I finally ran out of words, he said simply, "Ah, so you're designing for your father's eyes, not your own." The observation hit with the force of revelation. He was right. Even 3,000 miles away, I was still seeking approval from people who had no interest in giving it. "What makes your work unique, Jessica?" he asked, after letting the realization sink in. I started to give a technical answer about joinery techniques, but he waved it away. "No, not the craft that can be taught. What is the perspective only you bring? What do you see that others don't?" I thought about the pieces that had always satisfied me most, those incorporating wood. Others might discard burled sections with unpredictable grain boards, with knots and checks pieces marked by weather or insects. "I see beauty in the damaged," I said slowly. in the pieces others reject. Carlos smiled. Now that's interesting. Design from that truth, not from what you think will impress others. That conversation marked a turning point. I returned to the drawing board, literally and figuratively approaching my design not as a referendum on my worth, but as an authentic expression of my unique vision. My new concept emerged organically, a table incorporating wood. Others would consider flawed sections with knots, irregular grain, even partial damage, arranged to highlight rather than hide these characteristics. The imperfections would become focal points, enhanced rather than disguised. At the next critique session, I presented with newfound confidence. The response was immediate and positive. Fellow artisans asked thoughtful questions, offered suggestions, expressed genuine interest. For perhaps the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. As weeks passed, I established routines: mornings at the collective workshop, afternoons at program sessions, evenings in my tiny apartment, where I'd sketch new ideas by lamplight. Gradually, Seattle's notorious freeze thawed. I found myself invited to gallery openings, community potlucks, weekend hiking trips. Friendship developed with Lucia, another program fellow who specialized in reclaimed metal furniture. Unlike my family, Lucia asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. We began sharing workshop time, offering feedback on each other's projects, eventually meeting for coffee outside program hours. "You've changed since you arrived," she observed one rainy afternoon at a Capitol Hill cafe. "You used to look like you were bracing for impact whenever someone approached you." I realized she was right. The constant vigilance I developed as a protective mechanism was slowly giving way to something approaching ease. My progress wasn't without setbacks. 6 weeks into the program, I received a text from Stephanie with an attached screenshot of a family dinner conversation in our group chat, a conversation I'd been removed from. "They think you'll be crawling back by Christmas," her message read. "Dad's already talking about how your little adventure will be a good lesson when you fail." The message reopened wounds I thought were healing. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind cycling through familiar patterns of doubt and defensive planning. The next day in the workshop, I made careless mistakes, nearly injuring myself on the table saw. Carlos noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked, after suggesting I step away from the machinery. I showed him the text. He read it, then handed back my phone with a thoughtful expression. "You know what I see in your work, Jessica? I see someone who recognizes that damage doesn't diminish value, it creates character. Perhaps it's time to apply that philosophy to yourself as well." His words stayed with me as I refined my rebirth table over the following weeks. Each time self-doubt crept in, I reminded myself that the very qualities my family perceived as flaws, my sensitivity, creativity, attention to nuance, were actually my strengths as a designer. When the piece was finally complete, I felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything I'd experienced before. The table wasn't perfect by conventional standards, but it was authentically mine, a physical manifestation of my evolving philosophy that imperfections create character rather than diminish value. The program's midpoint exhibition gave fellows an opportunity to display our work to the broader Seattle arts community. As I stood beside my creation, a curator from a well-regarded gallery approached. "This piece has a compelling narrative," she said, running her hand along the table's surface. "The way you've highlighted these flaws rather than disguising them, it's quite powerful." I opened my mouth to minimize her praise, to explain away the achievement with self-deprecation, as I'd been conditioned to do. Instead, I simply said, "Thank you. That means a lot to me." Later that night, alone in my apartment, I realized I hadn't thought about my family's reaction once during the entire exhibition. For the first time since I could remember, I'd created something without imagining my father's dismissal, my mother's lukewarm praise, my siblings' competitive responses. I was finally taking up my rightful space. By the 6-month mark, Seattle no longer felt foreign. I'd developed habits and routines that anchored me to this new life: Sunday morning walks around Green Lake, Tuesday evening design workshops at the Collective, Friday happy hours with fellow artisans. My tiny apartment had transformed from an anonymous space into a home, walls adorned with local art and shelves filled with design books. My work was evolving too. After the positive reception of my rebirth table, I began developing a cohesive aesthetic that embraced and elevated imperfections. I created side tables from salvaged wood with prominent knots and checks chairs, incorporating bent pieces others might discard, shelving units that celebrated rather than disguised the material's natural quirks. Word spread within Seattle's tight-knit design community. Small commissions began arriving, first from friends of Collective members, then from design-savvy locals who'd seen my work at exhibitions. Nothing lucrative, but each project allowed me to refine my techniques and build a portfolio distinctly my own. I started dating casually, nothing serious, but the simple act of meeting someone for dinner without calculating my family's potential disapproval felt revolutionary. Grant, a graphic designer I met at an exhibition opening, became a regular companion for weekend adventures exploring the Pacific Northwest. Unlike the goal-oriented relationships I'd pursued in Boston largely to meet my parents' expectations, this connection existed solely for mutual enjoyment, without predetermined outcomes. The first significant crack in my newfound stability appeared with a Sunday morning phone call from my mother, rare, as our communication had dwindled to occasional text exchanges. "Jessica." Her voice sounded strained. "I need you to come home. Your father isn't well." My stomach tightened. "What's wrong with him?" "His blood pressure is dangerously high. The doctor says stress is a major factor." The implication hung unspoken between us. "He won't admit it, but I know he misses you." "We all do." Guilt, that familiar companion, flooded back with stunning force. "Has he been hospitalized?" "Not yet, but the doctor is concerned." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm worried, Jessica. I've never seen him like this." Against my better judgment, I began researching flights to Boston. I'd accumulated some savings from commissions, not much, but enough for a round trip if I was careful. I requested a week's leave from the program, explaining the family medical situation to Carlos, who granted it with concerned understanding. The night before purchasing my ticket, I made a casual reference to my upcoming Boston trip while texting with Lucia. Her response was instantaneous. "Wait, didn't you say your brother posted golf photos with your dad yesterday?" I hadn't heard this. A quick check of Ryan's Instagram confirmed it, my father smiling broadly on the 9th hole of his club's golf course, looking robust and decidedly unstressed in the New England autumn sunshine. The timestamp showed the photos were taken mere hours after my mother's tearful call about his dangerous condition. I canceled the flight plans and instead sent my mother a carefully worded email, explaining that while I hoped for my father's quick recovery, I would not be manipulated through medical emergencies, real or exaggerated. I suggested we maintain contact through more honest communication going forward. Her response was a single line: "Your father will be devastated by your selfishness." 2 days later, I received an automated email alert from my bank. My account had been overdrawn. Impossible. I'd been meticulously careful with my limited funds. Logging in revealed a shocking reality. A $15,000 withdrawal had been processed the previous day, draining my account and triggering overdraft fees. Frantic calls to the bank revealed the devastating truth. Years earlier, when establishing my first accounts as a college student, my father had insisted on being a cosigner for emergencies only. I'd forgotten this arrangement, never imagining he would actually access those funds. Legally, he had every right to withdraw the money. The timing couldn't have been worse. My rent check was processing, bills were due, and material orders for commission pieces needed payment. In a single vindictive move, my father had engineered a financial crisis designed to force my return. I spent that night on Lucia's couch, alternating between tears of rage and panic attacks. By morning, practical concerns overshadowed emotional devastation. I needed money immediately. Word of my situation spread quickly through the collective. To my astonishment, fellow artisans, people I'd known less than 6 months, organized an emergency fund. Some contributed cash, others offered materials, several shared leads for rush commission work. Carlos arranged for me to take on additional hours at the workshop, helping with maintenance and organization in exchange for stipend increases. In traditional artisan communities, members support each other through crises, he explained simply. This is no different. The collective's generosity provided immediate relief, but long-term stability required more sustainable solutions. I took a weekend job at a local woodshop teaching basic carpentry classes. I accelerated production on smaller items I could sell at craft markets, cutting boards, jewelry boxes, decorative shelving, while maintaining progress on larger commission pieces. Working 16-hour days left little time for dwelling on my father's betrayal, perhaps a blessing in disguise. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I reminded myself that every hour of labor represented another step toward true independence. Just as I was regaining financial footing, the second attack came from an unexpected direction. Carlos called me into his office with an unusually serious expression. I received a concerning call from the program administrator, he said, without preamble. Someone claiming to be a former employer of yours contacted them with allegations of professional misconduct, specifically that you plagiarized designs and misrepresented your experience. The accusation was so absurd I actually laughed. That's ridiculous. Who would? Understanding dawned mid-sentence. My father. Carlos nodded grimly. The timing suggests as much. Fortunately, the administrator contacted me before taking any action. I vouched for your integrity and pointed out the suspicious timing, but this is serious, Jessica. He's attempting to undermine your professional standing. The realization that my father would go beyond financial attacks to actively sabotage my reputation struck with physical force. This wasn't simple anger or disappointment, this was calculated destruction. What can I do? I asked, voice barely audible. Document everything. Maintain detailed records of your design process. Keep communications professional and transparent. Carlos leaned forward. And recognize this for what it is, the desperate action of someone who's losing control. That evening, I received a text from Ryan Datz, just trying to help you see reason. Come home and all this stops. I didn't respond. Instead, I channeled my anger into productivity, working late into the night on commissioned pieces, refining designs with obsessive attention to detail. If my father wanted to destroy my credibility, I would make my work so undeniably excellent that no one would question its authenticity. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very man who had dismissed my craft as just taking up space now apparently viewed it as threatening enough to warrant sabotage. In a perverse way, his attacks validated my choice to leave. They confirmed that my independence frightened him more than my failure ever had. As winter settled over Seattle, bringing short days and persistent rain, I maintained my punishing work schedule. The financial crisis gradually stabilized. New commissions arrived, my emergency teaching position became a permanent weekend arrangement, and I established a small but growing reputation within the city's design community. Carlos continued to mentor me not just in technical skills, but in navigating the psychological aftermath of my father's attacks. Your work has deepened, he observed one afternoon as we reviewed my latest designs. There's an emotional resonance that wasn't present before. He was right. My earlier pieces had celebrated imperfections in an almost intellectual way. Now that philosophy had internalized, I was designing from a place of hard-won authenticity, creating furniture that didn't merely accommodate human flaws, but honored the beauty of resilience. As the 1 year anniversary of my departure approached, I made a decision I would create a piece that told my story not for my family's eyes, but for my own healing. The exhibition, marking the culmination of the Rainier Artisan Development Program, was scheduled for late April, almost exactly 1 year after I'd left Boston. Each fellow would present a signature piece representing their artistic evolution during the program. For weeks, I circled around concepts for my exhibition piece, sketching ideas that felt significant but not quite right. The breakthrough came during a mentoring session with Carlos. "What's the most meaningful object in your family history?" he asked, as we discussed potential directions. "The dining table," I answered without hesitation. "Great-grandfather's mahogany monstrosity. It's where everything happened, celebrations, confrontations, that final dinner, when my father said, 'I just take up space.'" Carlos nodded thoughtfully. "And if you were to reclaim that symbolic space, what would your version of a family table look like?" The question unlocked something vital. I began sketching immediately, a table unlike anything I'd created before. While my previous work had incorporated flawed wood as aesthetic elements, this would be structural storytelling on a different scale. I named it the Phoenix Table before cutting the first piece of wood. Like the mythical bird, it would rise from the ashes of my former life, transformed and transformative. The design incorporated wood from each state I traveled through on my journey: West Pennsylvania cherry, Ohio maple, Illinois, walnut, Wyoming pine, Montana cedar, Idaho, fir, Washington alder. Each section would retain its distinctive characteristics: knots, grain patterns, color variations, unified through construction rather than forced uniformity. Most significantly, the table featured clearly delineated places, not the undifferentiated perimeter of traditional tables, where some voices dominate while others are silenced, but intentional spaces honoring each person's right to be present. The joinery between sections would use a variation on Japanese kintsugi, with copper and brass inlay highlighting, rather than disguising the connections between disparate elements. I worked obsessively, often sleeping on a cot in the workshop to maximize production time. The technical challenges were considerable. Each wood type required different tools and techniques. The metal inlays demanded precision. I'd never before attempted the structural engineering needed to balance aesthetic vision with functional stability. Carlos provided guidance, but deliberately limited his intervention. "This is your story to tell," he said when I sought solutions to particularly challenging sections. "Trust your instincts." As the piece took shape, so did its meaning. What began as a response to family dynamics evolved into a broader statement about belonging, about claiming space, about turning wounds into wisdom. The table wasn't a rejection of my past, but an integration of it transformed into something entirely new. 3 nights before the exhibition, disaster struck. A spring storm caused flooding in parts of the collective's warehouse, including the corner where my nearly completed table was stored. I arrived at dawn to find water damage affecting several sections, particularly the cherry and maple components. The damage wasn't structural, but aesthetic water stains had altered the carefully prepared surfaces, creating unplanned discoloration and raising grain I'd spent weeks perfecting. With less than 72 hours until installation, there wasn't time to replace the affected pieces. I sat on the concrete floor beside my compromised creation, exhaustion, and despair, threatening to overwhelm me. Carlos found me there an hour later, still staring at the watermarks. "Well," he said after assessing the damage, "what are you going to do?" "I don't know if I can fix this in time," I admitted. "Who said anything about fixing?" He gestured toward the table. "Isn't your whole philosophy about honoring rather than hiding imperfections?" I looked at him sharply. "This is different. These aren't natural imperfections, this is random damage." "Is it, though?" His expression was challenging but kind. "Isn't this exactly what happened to you? A sudden storm that left marks you didn't choose, but now must incorporate." The parallel was so perfect it took my breath away. This wasn't a setback, it was the final element my piece had been missing. I worked through the night and following day, adapting my design to incorporate rather than conceal the water damage. The stains became intentional features enhanced with subtle pigmentation that transformed them into flowing patterns reminiscent of rivers and coastlines. The raised grain received special attention, sanded to tactile smoothness that invited touch while remaining visually distinctive. By installation morning, I was operating on caffeine and determination alone. The Phoenix table, now complete, looked nothing like my original sketches, yet embodied my vision more perfectly than I could have imagined. Every element, from the carefully selected woods, to the metal joinery, to the now deliberate water markings, told part of my journey from Boston to Seattle, from diminishment to self-determination. The exhibition opening arrived with the nervous energy unique to artistic unveilings. Fellows, mentors, community members, and local design professionals filled the gallery space, moving from piece to piece with appreciative murmurs. I stood beside my table, simultaneously proud and vulnerable as strangers approached to examine my work. "The technical execution is impressive," commented one gallery owner, running her fingers along the copper inlay. "But what truly distinguishes this piece is its emotional resonance. One senses a personal narrative embedded in the materials." Others noted the table's unusual configuration, the intentional spaces, the celebration of characteristics typically hidden in fine furniture. Several inquired about commission possibilities, business cards discreetly exchanged for follow-up discussions. As the evening progressed, I spotted a familiar figure moving hesitantly through the crowd, Stephanie looking simultaneously out of place and determined in her East Coast designer outfit. "Surprise," she said, approaching with an uncertain smile. "I hope it's okay that I came." Shock rendered me momentarily speechless. "How did you know about this?" "I've been following your program's website," she admitted. "When I saw the exhibition announcement, I wanted to see what you've been doing." The revelation that my sister had been quietly tracking my progress for months shifted something in my understanding of our relationship. "Does everyone else know you're here?" I asked. "No. This is just me." She gestured toward the Phoenix table. "Is this your piece? It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Something angry, maybe, a middle finger to the family." She studied the table more carefully. "But this is beautiful. Complicated, but beautiful." We moved to a quieter corner of the gallery, the conversation flowing more easily than I would have imagined possible. Stephanie described changes at home, how my departure had disrupted family dynamics in unexpected ways, how my mother had started standing up to my father in small but significant ways, how Ryan's golden child status had become a gilded cage of expectations. "I was jealous when you left," she admitted. "Not because I thought you'd succeed, but because you had the courage to try." "You could try too," I suggested. She shook her head. "I'm not like you. I've built my entire identity around fitting in there. I wouldn't know who I am without it." As the exhibition wound down, Carlos approached with news that left me reeling. A boutique hotel developer had seen my work and wanted to commission dining tables for their new Seattle property, a substantial contract that would establish me professionally beyond the program. They specifically mentioned the watermarking as what caught their attention, Carlos added with a meaningful glance. "Sometimes our greatest setbacks become our signature innovations." Later that night, Stephanie and I shared a late dinner at a 24-hour diner, our conversation veering between childhood memories and current realities. We weren't suddenly best friends, but something had shifted, a recognition of each other as adults with separate but connected journeys. "You're different," she observed as we said goodbye outside her hotel. "Not just successful, though clearly you are, but solid somehow. Like you've figured out who you are." "I'm getting there," I replied. As I watched her cab disappear into Seattle's rainy night, I realized the truth in her observation. The past year had transformed me as surely as I'd transformed the wood in my Phoenix table. I had taken damage and incorporated it, found strength in vulnerability, created beauty from what others had discarded. I had finally learned to take up space, not apologetically, not defensively, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows precisely where she belongs. 2 years after leaving Boston, my life had settled into rhythms that still occasionally surprised me with their stability and satisfaction. Phoenix Design Studio, named for that pivotal exhibition piece, occupied a modest but well-equipped space in Seattle's Georgetown district. The hotel commission had led to others establishing my reputation for custom furniture that incorporated, rather than disguised, natural imperfections. My signature aesthetic had evolved into something instantly recognizable among Seattle's design community. I now employed 2 part-time assistants, both promising woodworkers I'd met through the collective. We maintained a waiting list for commissions, a reality that still occasionally struck me as surreal given my family's dismissal of my hobby. On a rainy Tuesday in October, a thick envelope arrived at the studio containing the latest issue of Northwest Design magazine. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it to the feature article, Phoenix Rising Jessica Mitchell Transforms Furniture Design Through Radical Acceptance of Imperfection. The 6-page spread included professional photographs of my work, interviews with clients and fellow designers, and a profile detailing my philosophy and process. I'd been candid with the writer about my journey, though I'd kept family specifics vague, describing only a traditional East Coast environment where conventional success was narrowly defined. I was examining the magazine when my phone rang, with my mother's number still a rare enough occurrence to quicken my pulse. "Jessica, have you seen it?" Her voice contained an unfamiliar note. "Seen what?" "The magazine." "Your magazine." "Someone sent us a copy." The revelation that Northwest Design had readers in Boston hadn't occurred to me. "Oh, yes, I just got my copy." "The photographs are lovely," she said carefully. "Your work is quite impressive." Coming from my mother, this qualified as effusive praise. I waited, sensing there was more. "Your father saw it too." The tension in her voice increased. "He didn't say much, but he's had it in his study all week. I've seen him looking at it." I absorbed this information, unsure how to respond. In our infrequent communications over the past 2 years, my father had remained a carefully unmentioned subject. "We're hosting Thanksgiving this year," she continued. "Everyone will be there. Ryan and Catherine, they're engaged now, did I tell you? And Stephanie, of course." A pause. "Your father mentioned that, perhaps. That is, we thought we would like it if you would join us." The invitation landed like a stone dropped in, still water ripples of emotion, spreading outward surprise, suspicion, a complicated yearning I hadn't fully acknowledged. "Mom, I don't know if that's a good idea. He wants to reconcile Jessica." Her voice dropped. "He won't say it directly, you know how he is, but I think he's proud of you. In his way. His way hasn't historically been very supportive," I observed, keeping my tone neutral. "People can change. Not completely, perhaps, but enough to matter." A hesitation. "I've changed too." I promised to consider the invitation, needing time to process this unexpected development. That evening, I met Lucia and her partner for dinner, seeking their perspectives. "It sounds like a trap," Lucia declared immediately. 2 years of minimal contact and suddenly they want happy family Thanksgiving because you're in a magazine. Maybe I conceded. But what if it's not? What if there's an opportunity for something different? "Then you set boundaries and see if they respect them," suggested Lucia's partner, a family therapist whose insights I'd come to value. "You don't have to stay at their house. You don't have to stay for the entire visit. You can bring support." The suggestion crystallized my decision. I would go to Boston for Thanksgiving, but on my terms, staying in a hotel, limiting my visit to 2 days, and bringing Mia, who had become a close friend since our cross-country journey. My mother sounded relieved when I called to accept with these conditions. Whatever makes you comfortable, she said, a phrase I couldn't recall ever hearing from her before. November brought crisp air and anticipation to Seattle. Before leaving for Boston, I completed a special project, a serving board crafted in the Phoenix style, featuring maple with distinctive grain patterns and subtle brass inlay. Not quite an olive branch, not quite a shield, but something between a tangible representation of my new boundaries. The flight east felt like traveling backward in time, Boston's familiar skyline, simultaneously foreign and intimately known. The city had continued without me, of course, but in my absence it had transformed from defining context to mere geography. Thanksgiving Day arrived clear and cold. Mia and I took a morning walk through the public garden before returning to our hotel to prepare for dinner. I found myself unusually attentive to my appearance, selecting a deep blue dress that reflected my current aesthetic, professional but creative, polished but distinctive. Remember, Mia said as we approached my family's familiar brownstone, "You're not the same person who left. You don't need their approval anymore." My mother opened the door, her customary perfect appearance slightly softened by what appeared to be genuine emotion. "Jessica, you look wonderful." Her gaze shifted to Mia. "And you must be Jessica's friend. Welcome." The house smelled of traditional Thanksgiving sage roasting turkey, my mother's signature cranberry compote. Everything looked exactly as I remembered, yet my perspective had altered fundamentally. What once seemed imposing now felt merely formal. What had seemed permanent tradition now registered as simply one family's habits. Ryan and Catherine greeted me with cordial reserve. Stephanie offered a genuine hug and whispered, "Thanks for coming. It matters." My father wasn't immediately visible, the significance of his absence impossible to miss. He appeared as we moved toward the dining room, still commanding, still meticulously dressed, but somehow diminished from my memory. Whether he had physically changed or my perception had adjusted, I couldn't determine. "Jessica." He extended his hand formally as if greeting a business associate. "You've done well for yourself." Not quite an apology, not quite praise, but acknowledgement of a sort. I accepted his handshake with equal formality. "Thank you for the invitation, Dad." The dining table, that mahogany monument to family hierarchy, was set with the traditional Thanksgiving place settings. I noted with interest that I'd been positioned at the middle of the table rather than the end where I'd historically been relegated. As we took our seats, I presented my mother with the serving board. "I made this for today." It seemed appropriate. She handled it with careful appreciation, noting aloud the distinctive grain pattern and metal inlay. My father examined it with unexpected attention. "The magazine mentioned this technique," he said. "Your way of highlighting the irregularities." "I prefer to call them character elements," I replied. He nodded, a gesture that might have indicated anything from agreement to simple acknowledgement. Dinner proceeded with a strange combination of formality and tentative connection. Ryan talked extensively about his partnership track. Catherine showed her substantial engagement ring. Stephanie shared news of a potential job change. My mother maintained her role as conversation facilitator. When asked about Seattle, I spoke honestly about my business, my creative process, the community I'd built. Mia contributed occasional anecdotes that painted a fuller picture of my life than my family had previously been allowed to see. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat in the manner that traditionally preceded pronouncements. "I believe I owe you an apology, Jessica." The table fell silent. In 28 years, I had never heard my father apologize to anyone. "I was wrong to dismiss your work," he continued. "The magazine article made it clear you've established yourself professionally. That deserves recognition." I waited, sensing there was more. When nothing followed, I realized this was the extent of his reconciliation, acknowledgement of professional achievement, not recognition of personal harm. 2 years earlier, I might have accepted this partial apology, eagerly grateful for any positive attention. Now I recognized both its value and its limitations. Thank you for saying that, I replied carefully. My success is meaningful to me. But what hurt most wasn't your dismissal of my work. It was your dismissal of me as a person, worthy of respect and space at this table. The silence deepened. My mother looked alarmed. Ryan uncomfortable, Stephanie quietly attentive. My father's expression remained unreadable. I've built a good life in Seattle, I continued. I've found people who value my perspective, who make space for me exactly as I am. I didn't come here seeking approval or validation. I came hoping for the possibility of a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than conformity. My father nodded stiffly. I understand. He didn't, not fully, but perhaps he was beginning to, and that represented more progress than I'd believed possible. The remainder of the dinner saw subtle shifts in familiar patterns. My mother asked specific questions about my design process, showing genuine interest. Ryan, perhaps sensing the change in dynamics, seemed less certain of his customary dominance. Stephanie openly referenced her visit to Seattle, sharing positive impressions of my studio. I left dinner early, declining dessert in favor of meeting former colleagues from my Boston design firm. The goodbye was neither emotionally overwhelming nor coldly formal, simply the conclusion of a complex but not unsalvageable family gathering. That wasn't as awful as it could have been, Mia observed, as we walked toward the tea station. No, I agreed. It wasn't. The next morning before our flight back to Seattle, I visited a lumber yard in Cambridge where I'd first discovered my passion for woodworking. The owner remarkably remembered me. The Mitchell girl, he said with a grin. Heard you're making quite a name for yourself out west. I purchased several pieces of distinctive eastern white pine wood, native to New England that I rarely encountered in the Pacific Northwest. These would form the basis of my next project, a table for my Seattle apartment, designed specifically for gathering my chosen family. On the flight home, gazing at the country sprawling beneath us, I reflected on the meaning of taking up space, not as an apology or an act of defiance, but as a fundamental right of existence. My journey from Boston to Seattle hadn't been about escaping my family, but about finding myself, about creating room to become the person I was always meant to be. The Phoenix table had marked a beginning rather than an end. Its message continued to evolve in my work and in my life, that our flaws and fractures don't diminish our value but create our unique beauty. That joining broken pieces creates something stronger than perfection. That taking up space isn't an act of selfishness but an affirmation of worth. Back in Seattle, surrounded by the life I'd built, board by board, relationship by relationship, achievement by achievement, I understood with perfect clarity that I was exactly where I belonged, at a table of my own making. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. Have you ever had to leave a situation to find yourself? What was your turning point moment? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of transformation and healing. And don't forget to share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to take up their rightful space in the world. Until next time, remember that your flaws don't diminish your value, they're what make you uniquely beautiful.